I have a question, Sanjay, about antibodies. So I had the antibody test. I got it from Quest. I actually was able to get it from an online telehealth provider fairly easily. And it was negative, which wasn't too surprising. I, figured I could have maybe been exposed, but wasn't sure. But my question is about the innate immune. I don't have the language here, so I apologize, but I'll do my best. Is it? It goes to Heather's question, which is basically, does a negative antibody test mean? Is it equivalent to saying that you've had no exposure? The thing that I'm questioning is there this period that you showed on that graph where is it possible for the innate immune system or the sort of brute force immune system to actually deal with an exposure in a way that does not result in the body creating antibodies?
Great question. So that's something I've been investigating, and the answer to that is debatable or not exactly known. Okay, so I was trying to get as much information as I could before today, but for the last few days, speaking to a molecular biologist and to other physicians, and to someone who has, I think, more immunology experience than I do. Again, I haven't been able to fully cultivate that friendship with them yet, but we were talking about this on a couple of threads. And so let's simplify it down to the basics. When the virus comes into contact with your nose or oral cavity or even the conjunctive of your eye, the virus then has an opportunity to the basic word is infect. So it attaches to the ACE2 molecule, which is on the surface of all of these epithelial cells. It is brought into the cell, and all viruses have one of two ways of replicating. One's called the lysogenic cycle. One is called the lysogenic cycle, and one is called the lytic cycle. So lysogenic is that it comes into the cell and it interjects its genetic material into your genetic material, okay? And then it can sit there for a unknown amount of time. The incubation period for that, and we saw this with HIV, it is so variable and nearly impossible to truly nail down as a predictable time period. In some cases, in some viruses. Now, in coronavirus, in SARS-CoV-2, it is not a retrovirus, so it does not insert itself into your genetic material. Instead, it gets into your cell, it hijacks the material, the machinery of your cell. So it exposes its RNA, and your cell's machinery thinks that is just normal RNA, and that we should do with it what we usually do, which is create protein from it and do the other things the other genes tell us to do. And then by doing that, your cells are creating, they turn into the factory for this virus. Okay, so they create more and more viruses. The cell fills up with virus, and then the cell is lyses, and this is the lytic cycle. The cell lyses, breaks open, and all kinds of intracellular material along with huge amounts of virus spill out, and as it spills out, it gives the virus huge opportunity to continue its life cycle elsewhere. Okay, so then it infects the cell next door and down into your nasopharynx, and sometimes that can take 3 days to infect you to the point where you have significant signs and symptoms. It could take 14 days, maybe it could take longer than that. That's the basics of the infection with coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2. Is there perhaps a scenario where it doesn't go inside of your cell, but it resides the inoculum, what we call the initial viral inoculum, the amount and concentration of virus that was foreign to your body that went inside and sat inside of your nasal cavity may have drifted into your sinuses with the secretions, may have just sat in the back of your oropharynx without going through its cycle. How long can it last there? And does that elicit, like you asked, does that elicit the immune response? Now, the first thing I described to you definitely elicits an immune response. The cell, before it dies, does have the tendency to tell the cells around it that it's diseased. It does have a tendency to tell the white blood cells along the blood vessels that are adjacent to it, something's wrong here, okay? And this is the cell signaling cytokines that you may have heard, cytokines. They are a molecular signal to the blood cells, white blood cells, your immune system. Come here, something's wrong, check this out, okay? That's the start of your immune response. Then T cells become involved, and then B cells become involved, and that's the curve you see, okay? That's, 10 to 12 days, you get the IgM production, and then 12 to 14 days, you'll get the IgG production, and then the whole thing is as I described it before. That's when they're detectable, okay? It sounds like, now, can you tell me more about your illness?
I didn't particularly have. I'm hyper health conscious, so I'm likely to just have been noticing some tiny aberrations. I didn't have anything that really resembled an illness. I was just more curious. I had a secondary sort of contact who, my cleaning person worked for someone who was diagnosed, and so I knew there was some potential for having had an exposure, but. No, I don't have any particular reason to think that I had it. I also believe that I have a really strong I haven't had a flu or a cold in 5 years probably. So I feel as though whatever my immune system is doing, it's doing it effectively and efficiently. And I just wonder how this is exactly what you're talking about that I've been so interested in. So thank you.
Okay, welcome. What else? Oh.
So just to close the loop on the antibody testing, is it fair to say that a negative antibody test is not conclusive proof that you didn't have exposure, but it does say that your infection didn't reach a certain point? Something like that?
Opposite to that.
The opposite.
It's opposite. So it is that you were exposed to it and you had an immune response. So
I said a negative test, but so a positive.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Sorry. All right, let's back this up. So if you come back with a negative test, a negative antibody test, that means you did not have an exposure to that virus. And the reason you did not have a exposure to that virus is that immunologically, it was never recognized by your body, okay? Could you have been an asymptomatic carrier of that virus at some point in time? We don't know. All we know is it didn't cause disease and it didn't cause an immunological response if your antibody test is negative.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. But let me cover the positive though. I got to do this, sorry. So if it comes back positive, that means you were infected, okay? Now, why we want to know that you were infected is we would love to ask you questions about that infection. We want to know, was it mild? How long did it last? Where did you travel? Who did you hang out with? All of that. Because the more we know about, even if we don't have, the strain, we don't have the richness of the start to finish clinical history. We'd at least like to know, well, Jesus, you're positive. What happened? Okay, so we can add that to the data set.